Hello all, Rick here. So I've done a couple of videos on shields and shield types recently, and after browsing comments and generally looking into the subject, I still had a couple of questions. Beginning with, why do shields fail in the first place? But then also, why do we see both shield bubbles as well as the practically hugging the hull shapes? I didn't want to include all of this in the types of shield video, as it's more of a theory, but one supported by what we know of shields and how they operate in universe. Firstly, let's look at why they fail before hitting the theories. So, the first reason shields fail is power. Despite the futuristic technology at play, from EPS grids distributing energy to warp cores providing the power of matter annihilation, couriering that energy around a vessel, is still a limiting factor. When something strikes the shields, whether weapons fire or a rogue comet, the shields respond instantly by prioritising that impact site with the more intense spatial distortions. The shield emitters draw power from the shield grid, but if the rate at which they demand energy outpaces what the EPS system can provide, they weaken and possibly fail. Continual impact, pressure, or overwhelming firepower risks this. For this reason, a shield system often carries a charge made up from batteries of stored power drawn from the grid to supplement the demand, like capacitors. Another reason is heat. Shield generators, like many systems on a starship, get hot and need to dissipate that heat, which is incredibly difficult in space. To do this, the technical manual for TNG states that they are regulated by liquid helium coolant pipes. While operating, they are going to heat up, and eventually the heat buildup will trigger a shutdown to avoid damage to the grid. One or two emitters failing can be compensated for, but of course then those compensating emitters are going to be under greater strain too. Having the grid fail due to a safety feature might be preferable to it burning out completely, as that requires actual repairs. Sometimes, however, you may need to risk it for maintaining shields, but that's a situational call for the captain. When shield integrity fails, it's often a combination of these two effects, and restoring shields is a matter of cooling the emitters back into the safe zone while recharging the power they can draw from. The combination of these two factors is what is calculated in the general percentage that is displayed at the tactical station. While of course the tactical officer can have a more detailed breakdown, shields at 47% is a more concise delivery than dorsal shield emitters at 30% capacity and approaching maximum heat tolerances, while flank shields compensate for the discrepancy. A quick boost to these capacitor-like systems can partially restore shield integrity, and such energy is often drawn from auxiliary or emergency power or diverted from other systems. However, there are other workarounds too to get past shields. Shields respond to the point of impact at fractions of a second. However, it is still a system controlled by a computer, and computing power has its limits, even in the 2400s. Repeatedly striking out at various points can overwhelm the computations until something slips by. Of course, there is also the idea of actual damage to the emitters. Impact from deflecting things is often still transferred to some extent to the shielded vessel, and this can still cause damage. If the shield emitters were shaken up enough to be broken, then yeah, you're gonna have problems. The final thing I'll mention is the refresh frequency of the shield grid. This is the rate at which the shields are being projected, leaving minuscule openings that for all intents and purposes are unexploitable. Unless you know the exact frequency the shields are operating at. Then you can modulate your weapons, tractor beams, own shields or transporters to the same frequency, and act as if they are not there at all. After all, this is how a starship can fire through its own shields. So why do we sometimes see them as a bubble, and then other times mirroring the silhouette of the hull? For the sake of brevity, I'm going to call the latter a sheath type shield. Well, the sheath type grid has been more commonly seen in newer Star Trek, but does harken back to the original series days, especially the movie era. Two things. Firstly, we know for certain that shield shape is variable in most cases. Extending a starship's shield over an ally or other ward to protect it has been done numerous times in the shows. However, doing so puts a greater strain on the shielding vessel. Nevertheless, we can say for certain that shielding is 100% variable in shape, so either version we see on a single ship lines up with the lore. Secondly, a trait we see is that in time, power levels increase. The ships of the 24th century simply have more power created from their core and other systems than the original Constitution class could ever manage, which in turn is completely outclassing the NX-01. So I believe that generating a shield bubble may in fact be more energy intensive than projecting the field mere meters above the hull's surface, explaining why in the original series, motion picture era, and Strange New Worlds for that matter, shields are these sheath formations. By the time of the next generation, decades have passed and ships are more powerful now, leading to the bubble form to be the default configuration for raised shields. Simply, they had enough power to support it for longer. Alright, so if this assumption is true, then why go for the shield bubble over the sheath form? What advantage does it offer? After all, the change has to be supported by some internal reasoning. I think, simply, that intercepting an explosive torpedo 60 meters away from a ship's hull is better than having it detonate merely 5 meters over its surface. After all, a shield may dissipate most of the energy and physical matter that impacts it, but the kinetic force of the impact is clearly still felt aboard a vessel from all the wobbling around people do when they're struck. Inertial dampeners can compensate for a lot of this, but taking any strain off the system is going to only benefit it, and inertial dampeners are an internal system. So while both bubble and sheath in theory do the same job, the bubble form increases the buffer distance and therefore reduces the likelihood of bleed-through or secondary damage to the hull. However, the bubble is technically a weaker system as the field is stretched thinner, and therefore you need to supply more power to it. Power levels that were possible but not optimal during the 23rd century, but of the desired setting by the mid-24th. Of course, there is a benefit to the sheath shielding too, and that is that it reduces the ship's combat profile. Blasts that would otherwise have missed ricochet off of the bubble, but can pass easily over the tighter shield. It might also be more preferable for tighter flying manoeuvres for similar reasons. Shields might also become smart enough to detect incoming hazards and formulate the optimal defensive configuration. So what do you think of these reasons why shields fail? In theory, a perfect shield grid would never overheat, have a constant supply of unwavering power, and never be computationally overwhelmed. As for the changing shape theory, that is speculation, but one that seems to line up with what we see on screen. However, if you have an alternate explanation, of course feel free to drop it below for others to see. And until the next video, thanks again, and I'll see you next time. I've been Rick, goodbye.